The sonar image materialized on the screen at 10:23 in the morning on May 17, 2024, displaying an unmistakable shape resting on the bottom of Detroit Lake Reservoir in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. The Oregon State Marine Board inspection team, conducting routine underwater mapping operations to assess dam infrastructure, had discovered something that shouldn't have been present there. A large vessel lying 18 feet below the surface, perfectly preserved by the cold, fresh water of the mountain reservoir. Within hours, a dive team would descend into the depths to investigate the anomaly. What they discovered was a pristine 1959 Chris Craft Constellation, a 26-foot mahogany runabout that represented the pinnacle of American boat craftsmanship. The vessel's registration numbers, still visible despite 62 years underwater, would lead investigators to a name that older residents of the area immediately recognized: Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson, a beloved family physician who had vanished without a trace from Detroit Lake on August 12, 1962, along with his prized Chris Craft. The discovery would reopen one of Oregon's most enduring mysteries, a case that had haunted the small communities around Detroit Lake for over 6 decades. Dr. Johnson's disappearance had been investigated extensively in 1962, with search efforts involving dozens of boats, divers, and even military helicopters. Yet, despite all those resources and weeks of searching, neither the doctor nor his distinctive mahogany boat had ever been found. Until now. Before we reveal the complete story of Dr. Andrew Johnson and the shocking discoveries made inside that sunken Chris Craft, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell. This case demonstrates how modern technology can finally solve mysteries that eluded investigators for generations, and how the truth can remain hidden in plain sight beneath the surface of a peaceful mountain lake. This is the story of Dr. Andrew Johnson, a dedicated physician who loved the water, and the summer day in 1962 that ended with his disappearance into the depths of Detroit Lake, a mystery that would take 62 years and advanced sonar technology to finally solve. In August 1962, Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson was 41 years old and serving as the primary physician for the communities of Detroit, Idana, and the surrounding areas of the North Santiam Canyon in Oregon. Standing 5 feet 11 inches tall, with dark brown hair beginning to gray at the temples, warm hazel eyes, and the reassuring presence that made patients trust him immediately, Dr. Johnson was more than just a doctor to the people of this rural mountain region. He was a pillar of the community. Andrew had been born in Portland, Oregon in 1921, the eldest of 3 children. His father, Thomas Johnson, worked as an engineer for the Oregon Department of Transportation, while his mother, Margaret Johnson, was a school teacher. Andrew had 2 younger sisters, Patricia, who was 39 years old in 1962 and worked as a nurse in Salem, and Carolyn, who was 37 and lived in Eugene with her family. Andrew's path to medicine had been shaped by the Great Depression and World War II. He had worked his way through the University of Oregon Medical School, graduating in 1942 with honors. He had immediately enlisted in the United States Army Medical Corps, serving as a field medic in the European theater from 1943 to 1945. The experience of providing medical care under the most difficult circumstances had reinforced his calling to medicine and taught him to remain calm and effective in any situation. After the war, Andrew had attended the University of Oregon Medical School in Portland, graduating in 1950 at age 29. Rather than establishing a practice in the city where he could have earned substantially more money, Andrew had chosen to serve rural Oregon. Recognizing that mountain communities desperately needed qualified physicians, in 1951 he had opened his practice in Detroit, Oregon, a small town of fewer than 400 residents that served as a gateway to the newly constructed Detroit Dam and Reservoir. Andrew's personality was characterized by dedication, compassion, and quiet strength. He was the kind of doctor who made house calls at 2 in the morning in snowstorms, who treated patients regardless of their ability to pay, who knew every family in his service area by name. He delivered babies, set broken bones, treated illnesses, and provided the only reliable medical care for miles in any direction. Parents trusted him with their children. Elderly patients relied on him, and the community respected him deeply. In 1952, Andrew had married Dorothy Mitchell, a teacher at Detroit Elementary School. By 1962, they had 3 children, a daughter, Sarah, who was 8 years old, a son, Michael, who was 6, and another daughter, Jennifer, who was 3. The family lived in a comfortable house on the edge of Detroit with a view of the lake and mountains. By all accounts, Andrew's marriage was strong, his children were happy, and his life was exactly what he had hoped it would be. Meaningful work in a beautiful place, surrounded by people he cared about. Andrew's one indulgence, his escape from the demanding nature of rural medical practice, was his 1959 Chris-Craft Constellation. He had purchased the beautiful mahogany runabout in 1960, fulfilling a dream he'd had since childhood of owning a classic wooden boat. The Chris-Craft, which he had named Hippocrates, after the father of medicine, was meticulously maintained and represented the finest American boat craftsmanship of the era. On weekends and occasional summer evenings after office hours, Andrew would take his family out on Detroit Lake, cruising the reservoir's crystal-clear waters, exploring the flooded forest that had been submerged when the dam was built in 1953, and teaching his children to water ski. For Andrew, time on the water was restorative, a way to decompress from the stress of being solely responsible for the health of an entire region. By the summer of 1962, Andrew's medical practice was thriving. He had recently expanded his office, hiring a nurse practitioner to help manage the growing patient load. He was respected not just as a doctor, but as a community leader, serving on the local school board and organizing fundraisers for the volunteer fire department. He and Dorothy had been planning to build a new, larger home closer to the lake, with enough space for their growing family and visiting relatives. On Sunday, August 12, 1962, Andrew had what should have been a relaxing day off planned. His medical practice was closed on Sundays except for emergencies, and he had arranged for Dr. Henry Patterson, a physician from Salem, who occasionally covered for him, to handle any urgent calls. The weather forecast was perfect: clear skies, temperatures in the high 70s, and calm winds. Andrew planned to take the Hippocrates out for a solo cruise around the lake, something he occasionally did when he needed time to think and recharge. Dorothy later told investigators that Andrew had seemed in excellent spirits that morning. He had breakfast with the family at 8 in the morning, played with the children in the yard for an hour, and left for the marina at 10:30 in the morning. He had kissed Dorothy goodbye, told her he'd be back by 3 in the afternoon for dinner, and promised to bring the kids out on the boat the following Sunday. He was wearing his typical summer boating clothes, khaki shorts, a white polo shirt, a blue windbreaker, and his favorite captain's hat. Andrew arrived at Detroit Lake Marina at 10:45 in the morning. The marina manager, Robert Stevens, saw him preparing the Hippocrates for departure, conducting his usual thorough pre-departure check of the engine, fuel, and safety equipment. Several other boaters at the marina that morning later reported seeing Andrew, noting that he appeared relaxed and happy, perhaps looking forward to a few hours of peaceful solitude on the water. At 11:12 in the morning, Andrew Johnson departed Detroit Lake Marina aboard the Hippocrates, heading north toward the upper reaches of the reservoir. Multiple witnesses watched the distinctive mahogany Chris-Craft cruise away, its powerful engine purring smoothly, leaving a clean wake across the calm water. It was a beautiful sight, a classic boat on a perfect summer day, piloted by a man who seemed to have everything a person could want. It was the last time anyone would see Dr. Andrew Johnson alive. And the truth about what happened to him during that solo cruise would remain hidden beneath 18 feet of cold mountain water for 62 years, until modern technology finally penetrated the depths of Detroit Lake and revealed the fate of the beloved physician and his beautiful Chris-craft. The afternoon of August 12, 1962, began to feel wrong around 3:30 in the afternoon, when Dr. Andrew Johnson still hadn't returned to Detroit Lake Marina as he had promised Dorothy he would. Robert Stevens, the marina manager, noticed that the Hippocrates designated slip remained empty, and he remembered that Dr. Johnson had said he'd be back by 3 in the afternoon. It was unusual for the doctor to be late. He was punctual almost to a fault, and he was meticulous about keeping his word. By 4 in the afternoon, when Andrew still hadn't appeared, Dorothy Johnson called the marina looking for her husband. Robert told her that Andrew hadn't returned yet, but suggested that perhaps the doctor had simply decided to extend his cruise, enjoying the perfect weather. Dorothy wasn't reassured. Andrew always called if his plans changed, and he would never worry her unnecessarily. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Robert Stevens took his own boat out onto Detroit Lake to look for the Hippocrates. The lake, created by the Detroit Dam, completed in 1953, stretched approximately 9 miles long and covered approximately 3,580 acres at full capacity. Despite its size, the distinctive mahogany Chris-craft should have been easy to spot on a clear summer afternoon. But as Robert cruised the main channels and popular coves, he saw numerous boats enjoying the Sunday weather, none of them the Hippocrates. By 5 in the afternoon, Dorothy had called the Marion County Sheriff's Department to report that her husband was overdue from a boating trip. Deputy James Martinez was dispatched to Detroit Lake Marina, arriving at 5:25 in the afternoon. He interviewed Robert Stevens and other boaters at the marina, establishing that Dr. Johnson had left at 11:12 in the morning and hadn't been seen since. Deputy Martinez immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Dr. Johnson was an experienced boater who knew Detroit Lake well. He was responsible, careful, and not someone who would take unnecessary risks. The fact that he was over 2 hours overdue without any contact suggested that something had gone seriously wrong. By 6 in the evening, a coordinated search effort was underway. The Marion County Sheriff's Department had dispatched multiple boats onto the lake. The United States Forest Service, which managed much of the land around Detroit Lake, contributed personnel and vessels. Local volunteer search and rescue teams mobilized. Within an hour, over 20 boats were searching the reservoir, scanning the shoreline and open water for any sign of Dr. Johnson or his Chris-craft. The search continued until darkness made further efforts unsafe, resuming at first light on Monday, August 13th. By Monday afternoon, the search had expanded dramatically. A helicopter from the Oregon National Guard joined the effort, providing aerial surveillance of the entire reservoir. Professional divers from the Oregon State Police began searching known hazard areas, submerged trees from the flooded forest, rocky outcroppings, and the areas near the dam. As Monday turned to Tuesday with no sign of Andrew or his boat, the investigation began to shift from rescue to recovery. Sheriff Thomas Wilson, who had taken personal command of the search, assembled a team of investigators to examine every possibility of what might have happened. The theories fell into several categories, each with troubling implications. Theory number 1, boating accident. The most likely explanation seemed to be that Andrew had experienced some kind of accident while out on the lake. Perhaps the Hippocrates had struck a submerged object. The flooded forest beneath Detroit Lake contained numerous hazards. Perhaps Andrew had fallen overboard and been unable to climb back into the boat. Perhaps there had been a mechanical failure that caused the boat to sink.
But this theory had significant problems. The weather had been perfect that day. No storms, no high winds, nothing that would have made boating dangerous. Andrew was an experienced boater who wore a life vest and followed safety protocols. And most significantly, if the boat had sunk, why hadn't it been located? Divers had searched the areas where Andrew was most likely to have cruised, but found no trace of the Chris-craft. Theory number 2, medical emergency. Investigators considered whether Andrew might have suffered a heart attack, stroke, or other sudden medical condition while alone on the boat. If he had become incapacitated, the boat could have continued running on its own until it ran out of fuel, potentially ending up far from where anyone expected to find it. But Andrew was in excellent health, with no
known medical conditions. He had a physical examination just 3 months earlier that showed no concerns. And even if he had suffered a medical emergency, where was the boat? Where was his body? Theory number 3, voluntary disappearance. Despite how unlikely it seemed, investigators had to consider whether Andrew had staged his own disappearance. Had there been financial problems, marital issues, some reason why a respected physician would abandon his life? Sheriff Wilson's investigators examined Andrew's finances, finding them completely in order. They interviewed Dorothy extensively about their marriage, and she was adamant that they were happy and had no serious problems. They spoke with colleagues, patients, and friends, all of whom described Andrew as devoted to his family and practice. Nothing in Andrew's life suggested he had any reason to disappear voluntarily. Theory number 4, foul play. The possibility that Andrew had been the victim of a crime couldn't be ruled out, but who would want to harm a beloved small-town doctor? And how would someone have attacked him on the water without witnesses? Investigators found no evidence of enemies, no threats against Andrew, no indication that he was involved in anything that would make him a target. The theory seemed far-fetched, but in the absence of any other explanation, it couldn't be dismissed entirely. By the end of August 1962, 3 weeks after Andrew's disappearance, the active search had been called off. The Marion County Sheriff's Department kept the case open, but without the boat, without a body, and without any clues about what had happened, there was nothing more they could do. The official determination was that Dr. Andrew Johnson had likely died in a boating accident, with his body and vessel never recovered from Detroit Lake's depths. The impact on the community was devastating. Detroit and the surrounding towns had lost not just a doctor, but a friend, a leader, someone who had been integral to daily life in the North Santiam Canyon. Dorothy Johnson was left to raise 3 young children alone, without her husband, and without answers about what had happened to him. The medical practice Andrew had built closed within months, as no other physician could be found to serve the rural area. Andrew's family never stopped hoping for answers. His sisters, Patricia and Caroline, organized additional private searches over the years. Dorothy kept Andrew's office exactly as he had left it for over a decade, unable to let go without knowing the truth. The children grew up with a father they barely remembered, knowing him only through photographs and their mother's stories. As years passed, Andrew's disappearance became part of local lore. Old-timers would tell stories about the doctor who vanished on Detroit Lake, speculating about what might have happened. Some claimed to have seen the ghostly shape of a mahogany boat cruising the lake at dawn. Others suggested that Andrew's body and boat were trapped in the submerged forest, hidden so thoroughly they would never be found. By the 1990s, most people who had personally known Andrew Johnson had moved away or passed away. Dorothy died in 1998, 36 years after her husband disappeared, never learning what happened that August day. The case existed primarily in archived files and occasional mentions in books about Oregon mysteries. In 2024, Detroit Lake was facing challenges related to aging infrastructure. The Detroit Dam, completed in 1953, required regular inspection and maintenance. The Oregon State Marine Board, in cooperation with the United States Army Corps of Engineers, had scheduled a comprehensive underwater survey of the reservoir to assess dam infrastructure, check for sediment buildup, and map the lake bottom using modern sonar technology. The project survey work began in early May 2024, conducted by Marine Survey Solutions, a specialized company from Seattle equipped with advanced side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles, commonly known as ROVs. Project manager Lisa Chen had overseen dozens of similar surveys, but what her team found in Detroit Lake would be unlike anything they had encountered before. On May 17, 2024, at 10:23 in the morning, sonar operator David Martinez was mapping a section of the lake about 2 miles north of the marina, in an area that had been heavily forested before the reservoir was created. The sonar image showed the expected underwater topography, submerged trees, rocks, and the uneven lake bottom. But then a distinctive shape appeared on the screen, clear and unmistakable. "Lisa, you need to see this," David called out. "I've got what looks like a boat down there, and it's intact." Lisa examined the sonar image. David was right. The shape was clearly a vessel, approximately 26 feet long, resting upright on the lake bottom at a depth of 18 feet. The image quality was remarkable, showing details of the hull shape and what appeared to be a cabin structure. What was most unusual was the boat's condition. After decades underwater, most vessels deteriorate significantly, especially wooden boats, but this one appeared structurally sound, suggesting it had sunk relatively quickly and had been preserved by the cold, fresh water and lack of oxygen at depth. Lisa immediately contacted the Marion County Sheriff's Department. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a specialized dive team from the Oregon State Police had arrived at the site. The dive operation was carefully planned. 18 feet wasn't dangerously deep, but the submerged forest created potential hazards for divers. At 3:15 in the afternoon, 2 divers descended to investigate the sonar contact. What they found took their breath away. A vintage Chris Craft runabout, its distinctive mahogany hull remarkably preserved, resting on the silty bottom as if it had been placed there deliberately. The boat's registration numbers, still visible on the bow, were documented and radioed to the surface. Within an hour, investigators had traced the registration numbers to a 1959 Chris Craft Sequoia constellation registered to Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson of Detroit, Oregon. A quick check of historical records revealed the connection. Dr. Johnson had disappeared on Detroit Lake on August 12, 1962, along with his Chris Craft, in a case that had never been solved. By 5 in the afternoon, Detective Robert Chen of the Marion County Sheriff's Department had arrived at the site. The discovery of a 62-year-old missing boat with potential human remains required careful handling and extensive investigation. Over the next 3 days, a recovery operation was conducted. Due to the boat's historical significance and the potential for evidence related to a decades-old disappearance, every step was documented. On May 20th, using a specialized crane and flotation devices, the Chris Craft was carefully lifted from the lake bottom and transported to a secure facility for examination. The boat's condition was remarkable. The cold, fresh water of Detroit Lake had acted as a preservative, slowing decay and protecting the mahogany hull. The cabin was largely intact, though filled with silt and lake debris that had accumulated over 6 decades. Inside the cabin, forensic investigators made the discovery that confirmed everyone's suspicions. Human skeletal remains, still partially clothed, sitting in the boat's pilot seat. Personal effects found with the remains included a wallet containing a driver's license for Andrew Michael Johnson, a waterproof watch stopped at 12:47 in the afternoon, and a wedding ring engraved with AJ and DM 1 1952. Detective Chen faced the difficult task of locating Dr. Johnson's surviving family members. His wife Dorothy had died in 1998, but his 3 children were still alive. Sarah Johnson Williams, now 70 years old and living in Bend, Michael Johnson, 68 years old, living in Portland, and Jennifer Johnson Brooks, 65 years old, living in Salem.
On May 22nd, Detective Chen contacted the three siblings to inform them that their father's boat had been found in Detroit Lake, along with remains believed to be Dr. Johnson's. For the three elderly siblings, the news brought a flood of emotions: relief that their father had finally been found, grief at the confirmation of his death, and hope that after 62 years they might finally understand what happened on that August day in 1962. The investigation into what happened to Dr. Andrew Johnson, dormant for over 6 decades, was suddenly active again, and the evidence preserved in that sunken craft would finally reveal the truth about the beloved physician's fate.
Of specialists in marine archaeology and accident reconstruction, DNA analysis confirmed what the personal effects had already suggested. The skeletal remains were those of Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson. The confirmation came through DNA comparison with his 3 children, all of whom had provided samples. After 62 years of uncertainty, the Johnson family finally had definitive proof of their father's fate. The forensic examination revealed critical information about how Andrew died. Dr. Moore's analysis of the skeletal remains showed a significant fracture to the left side of the skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. However, the pattern of the fracture and the lack of other injuries suggested this wasn't an assault. Rather, it appeared Andrew had struck his head on something, likely the boat itself. The craft's condition provided crucial clues about what had happened. Marine archaeologist Dr. James Wilson, brought in to examine the vessel, made several significant discoveries. The boat's hull showed no damage from collision with rocks or submerged objects. The engine, when examined, was found to have a catastrophic failure in the cooling system. Specifically, the water pump had seized, likely causing the engine to overheat rapidly. Most tellingly, examination of the boat's cabin revealed that the windshield frame had a significant impact mark with traces of biological material that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Andrew. The position and angle of this impact site aligned perfectly with the skull fracture Dr. Moore had documented. Detective Chen worked to reconstruct the sequence of events. Historical weather records showed that on August 12, 1962, while the morning had been calm, a sudden afternoon wind event had developed around noon, not unusual for Detroit Lake, where mountain geography can create unexpected gusts. Wind speed records from the Detroit Dam Station showed sustained winds of 25 to 30 miles per hour between 12:30 in the afternoon and 1 p.m. The theory that emerged from the evidence was both tragic and remarkably simple. Dr. Andrew Johnson had been enjoying his solo cruise on Detroit Lake when his boat's engine suffered a mechanical failure, likely around 12:30 in the afternoon, based on the watch found on his body. The engine would have begun overheating immediately, and the sudden loss of power combined with the unexpected wind conditions would have left the boat vulnerable to the choppy waves that the wind had created. In attempting to deal with the engine emergency, perhaps trying to restart it or investigate the problem, Andrew had been thrown off balance by the boat's motion in the rough water. He had struck his head on the windshield frame with enough force to cause a severe skull fracture and likely immediate unconsciousness. The craft, now powerless and pilotless, would have drifted with wind and current. With Andrew unconscious or already deceased in the cabin, unable to send a distress signal or activate safety equipment, the boat would have taken on water through the engine cooling system's failed components. The vessel would have gradually filled and sunk, coming to rest on the lake bottom in an area that wasn't part of the initial search grid. Searchers in 1962 had focused on the more obvious routes Andrew might have taken, while the boat had drifted nearly 2 miles from where he was last seen. The cold, fresh water of Detroit Lake and the depth at which the boat came to rest had created nearly perfect preservation conditions. The lack of significant current at 18 feet depth, the low oxygen environment, and the cool mountain water temperature had prevented the rapid decay that would normally occur, essentially creating a time capsule that preserved both the boat and evidence of what had happened. Detective Chen also discovered something significant in historical records.
The 1959 Chris-Craft Constellation had a known issue with water pump failures, documented in service bulletins from the manufacturer. The problem had led to a recall in 1963, a year after Andrew's death. If Andrew had lived just one more year, he would have received notification of the defect and could have had it repaired. The Yakamawa investigation also revealed why the 1962 search had failed to locate the boat. The search efforts had been concentrated in areas where Andrew was known to typically cruise and along the most direct routes. The 2-mile drift before sinking, driven by the afternoon wind.
Events that placed the Chris-Craft well outside the search zone. Additionally, 1962-era search technology was limited. No sonar, no underwater cameras, just visual searches and basic dive operations in obvious hazard areas. On June 28, 2024, the Marion County Sheriff's Department held a press conference to announce the resolution of Dr. Andrew Johnson's 62-year-old disappearance. Detective Robert Chen, alongside Dr. Patricia Moore and Marion County Sheriff Jennifer Martinez, presented the findings to assembled media, community members, and the Johnson family. Dr. Andrew Johnson died in a tragic boating accident on August 12, 1962. Detective Chen announced his boat suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure while he was alone on Detroit Lake. In attempting to deal with the emergency during suddenly rough weather conditions, Dr. Johnson struck his head and lost consciousness. His vessel drifted and eventually sank in an area that wasn't searched in 1962. The cold waters of Detroit Lake preserved both Dr. Johnson's remains and his Chris-Craft, allowing us 62 years later to finally determine exactly what happened. The evidence presented was comprehensive and conclusive. The skull fracture matched the impact point in the boat. The engine failure explained why Andrew couldn't return to shore or signal for help. The weather records explained the rough conditions that contributed to the accident. The location where the boat was found explained why it hadn't been discovered despite extensive 1962 search efforts. Sarah Johnson Williams, Michael Johnson, and Jennifer Johnson Brooks sat together in the front row holding hands as they learned the complete truth about their father's death. After the formal presentation, Sarah addressed those gathered. "For 62 years, our family has lived with questions," Sarah said, her voice steady despite visible emotion. "Our mother died without knowing what happened to the man she loved. We grew up without our father, always wondering if he had suffered, if he had known he was dying, if there was something we could have done. Today, we finally have answers. Our father died quickly, probably without even realizing what was happening. It was a tragic accident, nothing more sinister than bad luck and mechanical failure. While we grieve for the life he didn't get to live, we're grateful to finally know the truth." The investigation also revealed the human cost of Andrew's death beyond his immediate family. The North Santiam Canyon region had struggled for years after losing its only physician. Several elderly patients who had relied on Dr. Johnson's care had died in the years following his disappearance, unable to access regular medical treatment. The community's health outcomes had suffered measurably until another doctor was recruited to the area in 1967, 5 years after Andrew's death. Historical records show that Dorothy Johnson had fought tirelessly to keep search efforts active in the months and years after Andrew disappeared. She had organized private searches, hired divers, and never accepted that her husband was simply gone. In the years before her death in 1998, she had told her children that she felt Andrew was still in the lake, that someday he would be found. She had been right, though she hadn't lived to see it confirmed. The 1959 Chris-Craft Constellation, after being thoroughly examined and documented, was carefully restored by a team of marine historians and boat preservation specialists. The vessel, a beautiful example of classic American boat craftsmanship, was placed on permanent display at the Oregon Maritime Museum in Portland. The exhibit tells Dr. Johnson's story and serves as a memorial to a dedicated physician who served his community selflessly. The exhibit includes photographs of Andrew with his family,
his medical license, testimonials from former patients, and a detailed explanation of what happened on August 26, 1962. Visitors can see the actual boat that carried him to his fate, preserved remarkably well after 6 decades underwater. Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson was finally laid to rest on July 15, 2024, at Detroit Cemetery overlooking the lake where he had spent his final moments. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, including his 3 children, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, elderly former patients who remembered his care, and residents of the North Santiam Canyon who wanted to honor a man who had given so much to their community. His headstone, chosen by his children, reads Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson, 1921 to 1962. Beloved husband, father, and physician, served with compassion. Lost to the lake he loved, finally home. The watch found on Andrew's body stopped at 12:47 in the afternoon, likely the moment of the fatal impact, was given to his son, Michael, who keeps it as a connection to the father he barely remembers. The wedding ring was given to his daughter, Sarah, who wears it on a chain around her neck, and Jennifer received her father's medical bag, recovered from the boat, a tangible reminder of the life he lived in service to others. Detroit Lake continues to be a popular recreation destination, drawing thousands of visitors each summer. Most who boat on its waters have no idea that beneath the surface, a 62-year mystery once lay waiting to be solved. But those who visit the small cemetery above the lake can see Dr. Johnson's grave and understand that even the most peaceful settings can hide tragic stories, and that sometimes the truth takes decades to surface. The case of Dr. Andrew Michael Johnson stands as a poignant reminder that not every disappearance involves foul play, and that sometimes the simplest explanation, a tragic accident, is the correct one. What makes this case particularly significant is how modern technology finally solved a mystery that had eluded investigators for over 6 decades. The mechanical failure that killed Dr. Johnson was a known defect that the manufacturer addressed with a recall in 1963, just 1 year too late to save his life. This tragic timing highlights how product safety improvements often come at the cost of lives lost, and why vigilant reporting of equipment failures is essential. Andrew's death contributed to better understanding of marine engine reliability, though he never lived to benefit from those improvements. The case also demonstrates the dramatic evolution of search and rescue technology. In 1962, searchers relied on visual observation, basic diving, and systematic grid searches. They did their best with available tools, but without sonar, GPS, or underwater cameras, finding a sunken vessel in a large reservoir was nearly impossible. The 2024 discovery came not from a dedicated search for Dr. Johnson, but from routine infrastructure inspection, using technology that didn't exist when he disappeared. For the Johnson family, the resolution brought complex emotions. Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer finally understood that their father hadn't abandoned them, hadn't been murdered, hadn't suffered a prolonged death. He had simply been the victim of mechanical failure and bad luck, unconscious within seconds, unaware of what was happening. While this knowledge couldn't restore the decades they lost without him, it provided the closure that their mother had desperately sought but never received. The case prompted reflection on how many other cold cases might be solved if resources were devoted to systematic underwater surveys of lakes and reservoirs. Experts estimate that dozens of missing persons cases in the United States involve vehicles or boats that sank and were never located. Modern sonar technology could potentially solve many of these mysteries, bringing closure to families who have waited decades. Dr. Johnson's story serves as a reminder about solo boating safety. While Andrew was experienced and careful, accidents can happen to anyone. Modern safety protocols, including requirements for emergency locator beacons, GPS tracking, and check-in procedures for solo boaters, might have saved his life, or at least allowed for faster location of his vessel. Today, the Chris Craft Hippocrates rests in the Oregon Maritime Museum, a beautiful boat that became a tomb and finally a memorial. Visitors who see it learn not just about a tragic accident, but about a dedicated physician who gave his life to serving rural Oregon communities. Dr. Andrew Johnson served his country in World War II, healed countless patients in peacetime, and died doing something he loved. His legacy lives on.